Whenever I see the phrase based on a true story show up in the beginning of a horror film, I can't help but pull my phone out to see how true that really is. Well, back in the early 2000s, when I was just 11 or 12, that phrase scared the crap out of me. Back then, it wasn't so easy to find out how true a true story really was, and it was while sleeping at a friend's house that I first saw Wes Craven's 1977 horror flick, The Hills Have Eyes. While traveling in a trailer through the desert to California, the retired detective Big Bob Carter stops at an isolated gas station with his family for fueling and rest. When they leave the gas station, the owner advises Bob to stay on the main road. However, the stubborn driver takes a shortcut to stop and look at an old silver mine once owned by the family. While driving over the old desert road, an accident strands the family alone, hundreds of miles from any help. Running out of options, the father goes for help while the others are forced to wait. They're unaware that they've ended up stuck near a group of psychotic cannibal criminals. Absolutely trapped by the murderers, they have to fight to survive. So how could this crazed cannibal film possibly be based on a true story? To tell this tale, we'll go far from the Nevada desert, across the sea to Scotland, and back in time to the 15th century, as we meet a desperate and cruel man named Sawney Bean. Alexander Sawney Bean was born in East Lothian, Scotland during the 16th century. His father was a ditch digger and hedge trimmer, and Bean tried to take up the family trade but quickly realized that he was not fit for this work. He left home with a vicious woman named Black Agnes Douglas, who apparently shared his inclinations and was accused of being a witch. After some time, the couple ended up the coast. Here they found residence at Benane Cave by Ballantrae in Ayrshire County in Scotland. The cave was a perfect hideout with tunnels penetrating the solid rock and extending for more than a mile in length. Furthermore, twice a day at high tide, the cave's entrance was flooded for several hundred meters, making it almost impenetrable. From this subterranean lair, Sawney Bean hatched a plan for his family's future. It proved a simple enough matter to ambush travelers on the lonely roads that connected the villages of the area. Then it dawned on him that in order to help make sure that he could never be identified for his crimes, he should murder his victims. To avoid those unnecessary visits to the shops for provisions, whilst at the same time disposing of any evidence, he came on the bright idea of butchering the bodies to provide a high-protein diet of human meat for himself and his wife. The high-protein diet seemed to have been effective as Mrs. Bean began to produce little baby beans. 14 little beanie babies in total, each with a very unhealthy appetite for human flesh. As the Beans' children grew up and in turn, through incest, produced beanie babies of their own, their cooking pots increased in size dramatically. Over 2 decades, generations of Beans grew up in Benane Cave, refining their skills of murder and cannibal cuisine, including the now lost art of salting and pickling the flesh. Finds of curiously preserved but decaying body parts were discovered washed up on the surrounding beaches in the area. Although mass searches were carried out in order to locate either the missing people or their murderers, nobody ever thought to search the depths of Benane Cave. As the years went by, the family grew older, and thanks to their high-protein diet, bigger. And as the family grew, so did their appetites. As many as a half-dozen victims would be ambushed and killed at a time in military-style operations by the Sawney Bean army. The bodies were taken back to the cave to be carefully prepared for the larder by the womenfolk. Things were going well for the Bean army until one evening when they attacked a man and his wife while they were returning from a nearby fair. One group pulled the woman from her horse and had her stripped and disemboweled before the other had a chance to wrestle the man to the ground. Realizing the fate that was about to befall him, he fought desperately to escape, driving his horse into and over his attackers. As he fought for his life, a group of about 20 or so people returning from the fair happened upon the scene. After a brief and violent exchange, the Sawney Bean army found itself, for the first time ever, at a numerical disadvantage, and promptly retreated back to the cave to consider the situation. As they retreated, they left behind the mutilated body of a woman as evidence, a score of witnesses, and one very angry husband. With the Beans' existence finally revealed, it was not long before King James VI of Scotland heard of the atrocities and decided to lead a search with a team of 400 men and several bloodhounds. They soon found the Bean clan's previously overlooked cave thanks to the bloodhounds. Now from here there are two versions of exactly how the story ends. The most common tale is that the Bean clan was captured alive where they gave up without a fight. They were taken in chains to the Toll Booth jail in Edinburgh, then transferred to Leith or Glasgow where they were promptly executed without a trial as people saw them as subhuman and unfit for one. Sawney and his fellow men had their daddy bits cut off and thrown into the fires, their hands and feet severed, and were allowed to bleed to death, with Sawney shouting his dying words, "It isn't over. It will never be over." After watching the men die, Agnes, her fellow women, and the children were tied to stakes and burned alive. The other story claims that the search party never went into the caves and simply placed gunpowder at the entrance, where the Sawney Bean clan faced the slow and terrifying fate of suffocation. Wes Craven himself was so intrigued by this grisly tale that it inspired him to write and direct the terrifying story that went down in horror film history, The Hills Have Eyes. Anyways, that wraps up our episode for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll be doing one more shorter episode, then we'll be getting back to our Urban Legend series. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
I got a secret I wonder, Dada.